Hello, I'm Rebecca Ferrier. I'm the virtual writer in residence at Emerging Writers Festival this November 2021. It's part of a UNESCO City of Literature exchange. I'm based in Edinburgh, Scotland, and today I'll be sharing a short story called Mulch. I'm a white British woman with warm brown shoulder-length hair, smiling. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a white shirt and a burgundy blazer with very fun racing stripes. Behind me is a wall hanging of Kynance Cove in Cornwall and a bookcase with various plants creeping into shot. I'm sat by a window, and although it's not on screen, there's snow lying on the cobblestones outside. For a quick context to the story I'm going to be reading today, Mulch is set in Peppercombe Valley in Devon, England. Prior to my moving to Scotland, I lived in many places, one of which was the West Country, and this may come out while I'm reading. The inspiration for this story concerns the invisibility of older women and of the loneliness that we face when we're no longer deemed desirable by society. This story asks what we would do without our community and how we might endeavour to build a new one. Mulch by Rebecca Ferrier. Oh, the carpet needed watering again. The squelch was off. It had to be loud, it had to be ripe, it had to be ready. Jay tugged the garden hose around her bedroom. Here, silverfish slept in corners and spiders held high the rafters with elaborate weaves. Onwards, the hose went, scraping the hall's floorboards. Smell that? Rot and ruin, sporing into lungs. A damp smell, a good smell. There's life in that there is. Plants don't speak. That's why Jay liked them, loved them, tended to them until they grew as tall as her head and as thick as her thigh. Rumour was she'd grown a baby once. It had howled and mizzled and gummed its displeasure across her meadowed sanctuary. No use, no good, fertilizer. Her plants were all that Jay could never be. Succulent, rare, green. Unattainable descriptors like comes back better year after year, a show of colour, great for bedding. This was not, never had been, never will be Jay. The skin at her joints was sagged, while her complexion sank to a tuber's hue. Her chin was whiskered, wide, and melted into a bullfrog's neck, hiding the collar to her faded floral blouse. It was a lucky shirt, won last September at the Pilton Village Growers' Fair. First prize, marrow. There's none to beat it, the head judge had said, mouth a-twist with envy. Her reward? Applause, muted through gardening gloves, a bright ribbon, and suspicion as narrow as a stem. Next came the besuited men and soil samples, the visitors and visors, and the questions, because her green thumb was too green, and a cut to her quick did not run red. Jay's cottage was cultivated in a quiet valley's inner elbow, wet and dark and forested. When the March rains came to Devon, the fields swelled and washed her road to a river. With a pendulum's walk, Jay would find the deepest part where two skies pressed upon the same horizon. Once the ripples stilled, she found nature's true mirror. There, her muddy reflection, a hag with only fog and frogs for company. Her plants were no extension, though she willed them to be, and she belonged to no one, not even the upside-down Jay staring right at her through the puddle pond depths. If she thought kindly on herself, a rarity, she could say her tangled hair had an ivy strength, and her face was as downturned as a hellebor's. But these were not petalled traits, no social currency for a 21st century, no love. This is mulch, only mulch. When the track to her cottage was dry, the postman delivered bills, junk mail, and letters from Jay's city-dwelling daughter. Sell the dump and live with me. It's not healthy. We'll get a good price. For God's sake, Mum. It's not like you need the money. Opened, then placed on the compost heap. Knotweed. That's all she is, thought Jay. An invasive species. No, it hadn't been worth it. That teenage quickie behind the waltzers with the ticket seller. He had been blinchingly kind, in a bullied, acne-prone way. Squelching grass, a dew-wet bottom, nervous hands in her school uniform, and broken knicker elastic. Her first and last. Jay's parents had shown displeasure, and, in return, Jay had grown her own, its Latin name, Atropa belladonna. This poisonous perennial could be found in between the shed and tomato bed. It put the aged couple and their ever-aspiring middle-class disappointment to rest. After the funeral, the cobwalled cottage, now sodden and steaming, was left to Jay and her unborn child. When pregnant and harbouring the fleshy seedling, Jay had pictured them, she and her daughter running together, wildlings calling as curlews, loping across moorland, knuckles bruised with beach rock, heather braided into their tangled manes, suppers baked atop salt-split driftwood. See the flames in sea colours? Singing songs only the beasts knew, the pair would dine on tender gulls, pickled limpets, and the season's first gorse flowers. It was not meant to be, for the Sprog had disliked the outdoors, whined it was all cold and wet and muck. She saw isolation where Jay knew freedom, and this child, her own and ever distant, sneezed in the pollen-heavy months, puckered red at tree sap, and grew a heart as conquer. Worse still, she gazed at herself rather than the garden, because she, this daughter, was a pretty creature. Yes, Jay could nurture those, tend them to loveliness, and never discover that for herself. No matter now. Jay had sowed a solution. She had planted him. In the conservatory was a long box, 6'4" in length, soon to be height, and heaped with nitrogen-rich banana-peeled soil. Jay flattened her palm to the trough, the hose now discarded. "Oh, you've grown, my love," she cooed. "Well, how we'll run and rut as wildlings. Bring!" The doorbell sounded. Nearly time, she promised. Nearly ready. On the porch were unwell-meaning sounds, hard shoes, distant voices. Youths? No, it couldn't be. Those wastrels threw stones, broke windows, called names, freak, witch, ugly. Children were easy to scare off, and she liked to scare them, and catch and poke. But what waited on the door's other side was a woman. Bleach blonde, clean, microfiber skirt tucked tightly around her rear, and a government-issue clipboard. Jay clawed a fleece around her shoulders and breathed into her net curtains. "Mrs. Irving, I'm Frances from Social Services." Her elongated vowels came through the letterbox in a corkscrew. Jay's toes curled inside her Wellington boots. Garden shears, their varnish worn to memory, settled in her hands. She had sliced stalks and roots and branches with these. A sapless woman would be no trouble, none at all. "There's no answer," said Frances to another. "Take the door down, Donald." "But we'll get in trouble," was the reply, wet as a watering can. "Isn't that breaking and entering? Legally, we can't survey the land until—" She might have had a fall. "I suppose it is our duty to save her." "No, it ain't." Jay wound the chain across the door and eased it open, pressing her face through the 3-inch gap. "You're from Bio, what, or Sinahoo?" she howled. "Corporate rights, genetic modification, soil suckers, plant pinchers." Ever since the Pilton Village Growers' Fair, there had been unwanted attention. Queries and post telephone requests, wrenched out, lying dead, and calls and calls and calls. "What plants are those, Mrs. Irving?" Frances wore a mouth that spoke without speaking. It said she'd fucked in fur coats, was bred to wear silicone, and sucked martini-soaked olives with high, shine lips. She was ill-placed on the garden path. Midges spanned figure-eights above her head. Her heels, red-soled, sank into the gravel, millipede metre by millipede metre, as if the soil, and all its critters, intended to close its maw around her. It'd spit her out again. There's no mulch in her, nothing that would rot good. Jay squeezed her shears tighter and pressed her thighs together. Oh, to grow a body like that. "I met those polyester slugs the other day," said Jay, recalling the wires and beeps and fearful technology. "Came trampling my begonias and shoving cuttings into plastic bags." "We need to see your living conditions." The man, Donald, spoke this time. "Be a dear and let us in." "We can help, Mrs. Irving," said Frances. Was this what Jay's own daughter looked like? Smeared with a sunless tan, bright contacts pressed into corneas, lashes wilting with too thick mascara. Here was a hybrid rose, clad in ice cream colours, who would not survive the winter. "I've called the police, I have," she said, "and they'll be here soon, they will." "There's no need, Mrs. Irving." "It'll take Officer Reed 15 minutes to get here from the village. I timed him once," said Jay. She shelled the mistruth from her mouth as one might chuck a pea. "Arrested your last bunch, didn't he? I saw right through them too, with their laminated badges." Oh, how she crowed when the Land Rover sped off, hearing sirens and slow rural bureaucracy. "You going to offer me 10 grand or 20 this time?" No one could afford him. Anxiety clotted Jay's nostrils. He was unripe and unfinished. No one can take him. He was all she would have, to belong to. I'm from social services," repeated Francis, whose stretched nails, stop sign red, extended forwards. "I'll pop the kettle on and we'll have a natter." Jay's own hands were broken. Her nails, undersides frowned with mud, thorn marks, liver spots, shovel shapes, and mole's tools. The question was, would he notice? There was a rawness to her knuckles she'd failed to scrub out, or was scrubbing the problem. She hadn't scrubbed before him, took no care as to what she looked like before him. Nearly time, I must be ready, nearly here. "Mrs. Irving?" Here came the crunch as Jay slammed the door, and snap as Jay's shears went a trimming. Shellac digits plodded on the wet, welcome mat. It was as quick as deadheading marigolds, screaming, close, then vanishing. Now there'd be no further visitors, nothing to disturb her and him together. That'll teach you, for coming here, being beautiful, showing off. Now no one had nice hands. This was fair. And if he didn't know what hands were meant to look like, he wouldn't mind Jay's own grubby paws. Instead, he'd love her, relentlessly, passionately, unendingly, because she'd grown him that way. Jay zipped her fleece and sloshed up the dirt track to Pilton. The village has a disused school, a converted church, and a blue plaque where the library used to be. There was one tea shop, unentered, where a lemon drizzle slice came with gossip as sour as the old women who ate it. From within, the tea drinkers watched Jay's progress, expressions matching the open-mouthed pansies in the planters outside. Their gasps folded mist along the water-ceiling windows, until the waitress, surreptitiously, used a tea towel to wipe them down. After all, Jo rarely came to Pilton. Her steps were tracked, and needlessly, it seemed, for the mud peeling from her shoes revealed her path. Oh, the Women's Institute would be droning on about this for weeks. Note, Jay was no longer admitted into their talcum bosom after she laced their Victoria sponge cake, "You ain't got no proof," with laxative-inducing monkshood, grew it himself, upon losing out on the best bouquet competition. Bastards. Gifton was Jay's destination. The charity shop collected limply sewn buttons, care home clear-outs, and a gentle cupboard smell. One never knew what could be found nesting in a coat pocket, warming a sleeve, or gnawing an old turban. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Behind a Jackie Collins novel was a shop girl, all nose studs and lilac purple hair. Too perky, too nice, too many questions. Here was a trap, flower pressed between kind words. Jay turned her back and scanned the racks. Should have bought the shears. Her hands sweated marks on the silks. She couldn't wear white. Too old. Too laughable. What about a dress with roses and ribbons and readiness to match her cheeks? No, it wouldn't do. The lilac tunic with petunias? Better a sack. Gentle as a bosom-blad, the shop girl spoke again. "Is this for a special occasion?" Embarrassment, not known since Jay's childhood, began to warm her face. At her own appearance, her talk, her size, she never spoke to people, didn't know how to, never had. Jay missed her garden. "If it's for a wedding, choose the blue." A thoughtful pause, then. "Yeah, I reckon you'd do well nice in blue." Jay's hair was brushed to bushiness, and her face washed bright. The blue Gifton dress was buttoned up and looked, dare she think it, nice. The March rains had told her so. She was ready, as was he. Afternoon sun branched haphazardly into the conservatory. Above, the clear roof was mottled red and brown and amber, church light through leaf mould. The trough waited. It should have grown runner beans and courgettes, thick gourds, or a bamboo border. Yes, it should have. It should have. Inside, the soil was breathing. Up and down, up and down. Jay could grow anything. That's what the locals said. Pete, spat the head judge, once spreading lies as manure to the mass market farmers. Anything to make a buck, to discredit her, bring her down a peg. Fool he was, to think it were the house that did it, the soil, the feed, the mulch. No, it was her. Jay reached out. Her fingers raked the nurtured earth and stirred the worms to singing. There you are, she wept. Oh, I've been waiting for you. Every second, minute, hour, longing for anyone who'd understand that I... A moist hand met her own, chilled and mushroom white. It locked around her wrist. Oh, this was love, wasn't it? At long last. A hard tug pitched her forwards, face deep into the damp earth. Here came doubt digging. Is it meant to be like this? She couldn't remember. Grit scratched her gums and dirt ballooned her cheeks. Compost muffled her coughs as her head went under. There was firmness. Beneath. He pulled harder, 2 hands now, this man she'd grown. Weight. A heave, a tug, like wrenching a garden hose. Fuzzed roots probed her nostrils, stroked the lines between her breasts, tucked themselves into creases and sought her private place where shame and heat gathered. Oh, her heels ran higher and wheeling kicks met only air. Please. Each limb was bound, vined and rooted, for these belonged to him now. And it no longer mattered that she could not breathe, could not struggle, could not fight, for Jay was content. No one had held her like this in years. Thank you for listening.